I'm EposVox, and today I'm reviewing the Elgato Key Light Air. This video kind of got away from me a little bit. The point I wanted to prove, and I may have proved kind of the opposite depending on your use case, was that a high quality light like this, the Key Light Air, the aperture light that I have, the Dasney lights that I've had before, show how big of a difference they make compared to the cheap old Amazon lights. Because every argument when Elgato releases their lights is, I can do this for 20 bucks on Amazon, and that's simply not true. However, I kind of realized the use case in which that might be true, because it's for the people with webcams, for the people leaving their cameras on auto that have, that aren't really getting that kind of granular difference that someone, that shoots on full mirrorless cameras and things like that sees. And so I did my test with a mirrorless camera, in two different webcams. And yeah, when you leave your webcam on auto, and even to a degree, if you're not picky about your color, if you manually manage your webcam, a cheap old Amazon light, if you're not worried about shadows and things like that, is fine, because the webcam on auto is going to adjust enough that the shadows in your face aren't a big deal. However, if you're trying to get good, actual decent looking lighting using a real camera, things like that, you want maybe not this one, but a high quality light, not some cheap, thin little Amazon panel. So hopefully that's conveyed here. If not, you have some samples and you can decide for yourself based on what you're using. But I think my point stands. It just may not have seemed that way based on my reactions when I was like, oh crap, the webcam is doing fine. Let's get into the video. So I have three different cameras arranged for this video to try to help convey my point as best I can. And in fact, I'm going to add a fourth in that I'm going to turn on the Sony here and just point it so that you can see the setup I'm working with. So the main cameras I have set up here is the Logitech Brio 4K webcam running at 1080p 30 in YUY2 mode, because that's the best quality mode for it. And by running it at 30 FPS instead of 60, I get a cleaner exposure. And then I have the Logitech C920 here, also running at 1080p 30 in JPEG mode, because that seems to be what's running smoothest for me at the moment. H.264 seems to have a bit of a delay. But I also have my Panasonic G7 with a really nice lens setup here. But you can see I'm really dark. This is because I don't actually have any lights on. I have my window blinds open here, but it's a dark, overcast, rainy day, so I don't have a whole lot of light coming. I'm mainly lit, by some super distant light in my room and my monitors. And the webcams are on auto to kind of compensate for this, whereas the camera is on manual settings, so I'm just in dark land over here. I'm going to be showing you how the light kind of interacts with these cameras a little bit. So I'm going to turn on my Elgato Key Light, which is mounted behind my main camera. This is my full-size one. We'll get to the Air in a moment. There we go. The G7's looking much better. It's still a little punchy. I could probably mess with my ND filter here. So we got me fully lit. I'm looking pretty good in both webcams. You can see on auto there is a bit of a white balance difference, and that is part of the problem with these webcams, is the white balance and kind of switching between auto and manual settings can get really finicky, and then when you set up manual settings, they tend to reset every time you reboot your computer or replug the webcam, which is not fun. In case you missed it, by the way, long before I was even known as the OBS guy or the stream whatever, I was the webcam guy. I put in years and years of my YouTube channel actually reviewing all of the different webcams on the market. I have a big, long playlist going back like almost 10 years of webcam reviews. If you want to check out any individual webcam, check that link in the video description. The only one I don't really have is there's a new AverMedia one that I'm interested in reviewing that I have here, but I haven't, reviewed just yet, that I'll be working on. But you can see here immediately the C920 here, I am much more well lit with the Elgato Key Light than I was before. With the Brio, I am still looking pretty good, but that white balance is just really bugging me. So I'm going to go into the configure settings. I have a whole video on how to make your webcam look better. Just keep in mind that it does reset every time you relaunch your computer. But I do have a video on G-Hub. Logitech's G-Hub software should let you take these settings and apply them by default every time you boot your computer to the device. Now, people have had mixed results, but that is the idea of what it should be doing. And you can see here, even with manual white balance settings, there's just like some greenness to it here that I'm not really able to replicate the C920 exactly, but I can get it pretty close. That's looking pretty good. I'm gonna hit apply, and then we are on auto exposure. I'm gonna turn off low light compensation now that we're in the bright, and I'm gonna do the same to the Logitech C920. I'm gonna turn off low light compensation. This should theoretically make processing power for these webcams a little bit smoother. So you can see here, I'm looking pretty good. Frame rate's holding up because we have plenty of light. This is what a good quality soft light will do for you. You have your, your shadows are smoothly rolling off. You have a nice big bright light source. I'm evenly exposed. My background still gets to stay, relatively dark, even though I have some bright lights on it. Looking pretty good. This is, immediately why you should be investing in a good light, because it just makes your video look better. Like I was already, due to the auto settings, it was able to kick up and evenly expose me before, but now it's able to do a better job. Pretty cool, especially with the, with the real camera as well. But this is the full-size Elgato Key Light. Let's change that over to the Key Light Air, which I am going to continue to struggle not to call the Key Light Nano, for whatever reason, throughout this entire video. I guess I'll go on and throw my complaint out here. I am super annoyed. I have to use my phone. You have to use a mobile device or a laptop to set up the key lights for the first time, which I just find a little silly. So I'm getting my other one set up here. Because it has no manual controls. I brought this up in my full key light review, but because it has no manual controls, I have no way of actually setting it up without an app, which is just silly in my opinion. I mean, it's quick. It found the key light, I added it to my Wi-Fi, and it's connecting it, and then it's available through the app and the Stream Deck. I just wish I had manual controls. Eventually, what happens if the app stops working and doesn't get support anymore? The lights are dead. All right, so again, this is with the big key light. This is with the Key Light Air. So it is a softer source. You are going to get a little bit of harsher shadows, but some people said if they found it a little bit more pleasing in my test video up on Twitter. You will see though that my actual real camera is struggling a little bit because it is less light output for the same brightness level that I was targeting. I can crank that up. Another complaint I have is the software is a pop-up thing. It's not a dedicated window. So if I want to make these adjustments, like I can't drag it. So I can make it brighter. So this is 100% brightness. Both cameras are looking pretty good. Real cameras looking all right. This is 100% brightness. So this is a single key light source hitting my face, lighting it up. You can see both webcams, again, benefit pretty solidly from it. But what if we turned on a second one? I have two key light airs. So now we have a key and a fill. The fill is set to a little bit of a lower brightness and just helps fill in some of those shadows. And now all three cameras are looking significantly better. The problem is the C920 is starting to get overexposed. My skin is starting to blow out. It's starting to look a little ridiculous. So now we need to crank into manual settings for these cameras, which is always annoying because they don't always want to work. So there we go. I turned down the main one a little bit and turned down the key a little bit, or the fill a little bit as well. And now we are still at -5 exposure, but we are evenly lit and not blown out. With the Logitech Brio here, I'm still fairly evenly lit. We may not need to make any changes. I'm going to uncheck auto exposure. You can see for whatever reason, going from auto to manual, even though it's on the same flag, is immediately a different brightness. If I turn it down, it's way too dark. If I turn it up, I'm overexposed. So -5 seems to be fine, but if I turn on auto, then it just gives a little bit tiny extra exposure that I can't get manually. But it looks really freaking good. These are good lights. You're going to get good results from them. You can see that here. So I'm going to turn off the fill light here. So we just have the key. So this is what your cameras will look like. Looks pretty good, other than color issues or what have you with webcams. Looks pretty solid. What if we use something cheaper? Because that's what comes up every time we make one of these reviews of an Elgato light. They're like, oh, they're too expensive. They cost too much. I can do it for cheaper. So I have here a collection of lights. I have 1, 2, 3 different cheap Amazon LED panels with varying degrees of diffusion on them that people keep saying you can do the same job as the Elgato Key Light with one of these. Here is a best light that has 11 watts of power, runs off a battery with just a sheet of diffusion material and the default diffusion panel slotted in on it. I used this one for a while as my key light. This one is a T1688. I don't know what the exact brand from it is, but it is another edge-lit one in the style of the Elgato Key Light that allows you to get pretty soft light out of this one front panel here. I used this for a very long time as my main light. And then this is a newer light that has its own dedicated softbox on it that comes in a full softbox kit that's supposed to be used for video. The problem is these are very small lights. You don't want a small light source for your key light. I believe it's called the inverse square law that talks about having bigger sources or sources closer to you. Smaller sources make harsher shadows. That's just light basics. This is not going to do a good job. What might do a good job is another edge lit light. This is the Dasny D50. I did a whole review of these as the Elgato Key Light Killer because they're super bright and they're super affordable. For about the price of the Elgato Key Light Air, you can usually get a few of these. I have almost 20 of these at this point, due to reasons that I can't really go into, but they're pretty solid. So we're going to see how they compare in a super rapid fire quality test here. I'm not going to go too deep. You're just going to see how they look. This is the T1688. I'll try to have product links to all of these in the description below, but all of these cheap Amazon lights are made by fly-by-night companies that basically swap out their inventory every few months, so not all of them will still be available. You can see here at the exact same exposure, both the real camera and the C920 are significantly darker. This is at 100% max brightness for this cheap light. You're not getting much light output out of it. It's fairly soft, but since it's so small, it still comes off as hard, and once it actually hits my face, it's pretty gone. Now the Brio is still showing fine because it is in auto mode. So then, for example, the C920 here, I have to go back into the exposure and start kicking it up, which is not a good time. And then the camera starts getting kind of blurry or choppy. Doesn't look great. Or I could kick it into auto mode and it looks about the same, but the frame rate holds up for some reason. Again, I don't understand what the difference here is with these webcams. But I can still look okay. Like, the light is still decently soft, but it's not as soft as it could be. The real camera, I have to just crank up ISO. I'm not going to worry about it. But you have to crank up the light. Basically, when you have to crank up exposure in your cameras, people are just like, okay, just do it. You get a lot more noise. You get a lot more, blown outness of the background lights here. You get a lot more noise and grain and compression. And as you saw here, if you actually want manual settings so you maintain control over your camera, it starts to get really ghosty every time you change settings. And now I just changed it back to the exact setting it was just on before I made it too bright. And suddenly it's a different exposure. So then I go back to this and suddenly this is fine. This is -5. This is where it was fine with the other light. And now it's back. These cameras are so freaking inconsistent. It drives me up a wall. But, it doesn't look as good. This is max brightness for this light, and it's barely any brighter than this barely lit window here. All right, so that's the T168. Let's go to best light, which is even smaller. It's even smaller, but since it's not edge lit, it has more lights actually directly hitting you, so it might be brighter. All right, this is with the best light LED panel. I have it cranked up to 100%. It is pretty bright. The normal camera is fairly exposed. It looks pretty decent. I will cover a reason why these aren't super great in a moment, but it's all right. You can see my Logitech camera is back to being overexposed again. Now this is with the Dasny D50, which actually provides a lot more brightness than I actually had set with the Elgato Key Light, but you get the idea. This does provide a big, nice, bright, and diffused light source, and mostly gets you where you need. And now we're back with the dual Key Light Mini, or Key Light Air setup. So ultimately, can you recreate the effect, the look of having an Elgato Key Light specifically with cheaper, Amazon lights? Yeah, you can. It's all lighting. You can get most of the way there if you're willing to do a little patience, a little rigging with your own diffusion. You're going to deal with some outages because, like, this light specifically had a LED that just died and there's nothing to do about it. They're going to die quicker if they're cheaper. You're going to drop and, destroy them. They start to flicker. I've had both this one and some of the Dasny lights over time, like, especially if power isn't super consistent or whatever, flicker, or if you're doing high frame rate shooting, they can flicker on camera. A lot of them just are not bright enough, or if they're too small, cheap $20 LED panels off of Amazon are very, very small. You will get harsher light without the right principles and things like that. But another issue you will run into once you move away from the webcam setup to the real camera setup is you're going to run into things like, well, not only the exposure differences, which are a big deal on real cameras, but also color quality differences. Now, some of these lights, like this one is bicolor, and the Dasny panel is bicolor, but that doesn't mean that they're color accurate. So I had them all set to 5600 Kelvin, which is a color temperature of light, but they produce slightly different color effects on my real camera. And a lot of the, cheap ones will have a green or a red cast on your skin, even if you're white balanced correctly, because they just aren't color accurate lights, which specifically, for your backdrops, for your desk, for your colored lighting, that doesn't matter. For your skin tones, it can have some pretty gnarly effects on how your skin is recreated. And that is where the investment, cost of something like an Elgato Key Light comes into play, as well as the cool, I can turn them off with the press of a button or change the color temperature or whatever with the Elgato Stream Deck integrated into a multi-action, say go live, it turns everything on, all of that, if that's what you're into. But if you really do need to save a budget, a buck or whatever, yeah, a cheap light or putting, a napkin over a lamp could do it for you. But that doesn't mean that's what everyone should. And I really think, I really struggle with this because as an educator, I should be able to convey this more clearly. But I really do think it's just a matter of once you reach a certain point of what kind of quality you need out of your lights, these things just stop being options. Once you get to a certain point in gear, like my real camera here, I would never subject that to these cheaper lights because it will cause me more hassle of getting the same quality, the same image reproduction, the same color I want out of it for my skin than just using the more expensive ones. And I mean, hell, you can't really see it, but over on my main webcam recording setup side, I have an Aperture Tri-8, which is a big, expensive key light because it's super soft, perfectly diffused, and has very accurate color temperature, color reproduction for my skin tones to keep me from fighting the problems. Because if you remember any of my older tutorial videos at the desktop camera setup with any of these smaller lights going through all the way back to 2016 moving forward, the videos were so different. They had, my skin was green. I got a lot of comments about how sickly I looked all the time because I couldn't get my skin looking correctly. Some of that was my skills at color grading, but a lot of it was because it was recorded in camera with a weird color cast on my skin that is very hard to remove in post. And the light, the exposure was all over the place. I had some pretty harsh shadows for a while. Sometimes the video was just too dark. It's because I kept trying to experiment with these cheaper options and it just wasn't working out. So, if it's too expensive for you, it's too expensive for you. I can't, it's not my job to convince you otherwise, but I wanted to provide kind of a more real world scenario with different camera angles here as far as, why you might want a more expensive light like this. If you enjoyed this video, I know it was a little weird for me, hit the like button, subscribe for more tech education. I'm EposVox, your stream professor. I'll see you next time.